Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today you join me in the 2024 Hyundai Kona, or Hyundai as we're now told it is. I can't get out of the habit of saying Hyundai, unfortunately, but it is what it is, right? This is a very nice family car that is very popular in the UK, actually. The Kona seems to have really been one of those cars that's taken the UK by storm. I see them absolutely everywhere, and this new model is a massive step up from the previous one, in my opinion. It's kind of the sister car of the Kia Niro, which I've done a review of on the channel before and really thoroughly liked. Kia and Hyundai do have the best warranties in the business in many ways, and I think they're really a good choice for many people who want kind of a safe car with lots of decent tech for the family. And that's why they've really rose to popularity here, and I'm here to tell you why the new Kona is worth your consideration. Before we dive into specs, options and all that kind of thing, it's worth noting that the Kona comes with 3 distinct drivetrain options. You can either get a standard petrol, you can also get a hybrid, and you can also get a full EV. So prices start from around £25,000 with the entry model, which is the one that I've got here. There's also 4 trim levels to choose from, which means that there's pretty much a Kona for everyone. For a top spec EV, you can spec it up to about 46 grand. So because there's such variety, I'm not going to go through all of the different specs and options, but I'll show a few on screen now. This one that I've got here is the Advance, which comes with 2 12.3-inch screens, which is standard across the whole range, which I really love to see. I hate when manufacturers put tiny, silly little screens on cars now. It's nice that you basically get the same experience across the board. So you get smart cruise control, LED lights, dual zone climate control, some 17-inch alloys, which I do think, unfortunately, do look a little bit lost on this car, keyless entry and parking sensors. So in actual fact, when I got in this, I didn't actually know it was the bottom spec car, and actually I've been pleasantly surprised. It still feels pretty premium, considering this is the very entry-level model. So a couple of grand more gets you an N-Line version. The N-Line one has 18-inch alloys, which do look a lot better, heated front and rear seats, heated steering wheel, ambient light package, and also a power tailgate. So I think that's probably the sweet spot in the range, to be honest. You can also get the N-Line S, which has a few extra tech features. If you get the hybrid or the EV, you can get that one with surround view cameras. Unfortunately, that's not available on the petrol one for some reason, but that's the one with the 360-degree cameras and the top-down view, and I absolutely love that. It makes the car so easy to park and easy to use. It's something that I do miss, but definitely not essential. There's also blind spot monitoring cameras on that model, and you get Bose premium sound system, although to be honest, the one that's included in the base model is just fine. There's also a Lux pack for 1800 quid that you can install, which is basically a panoramic roof and the relaxation electric seats that recline all the way back. A few other little bits like memory function for those electric seats as well. So let's talk drivetrain options then. The one that I've got here is a 1-litre turbo petrol, 120 brake horsepower, 0 to 60 in 11.8 seconds, so it's not particularly fast. Quite nippy round town at low speed, but you will notice that out on the motorway. Now, it's supposed to return around 48 mpg, which isn't too bad of a figure. I've been averaging more like 40, so not great, but to be honest, I'm not driving particularly sensibly for any reason at all. I'm just driving how I would normally drive, and it's not a bad figure. I just think that obviously the hybrid would be a much better choice if that's your worry. Also available is a 1.6 turbo, which steps it up to 198 brake horsepower, 0 to 60 in 7.8 seconds. A lot more brisk, that one. Both are front-wheel drive only and can either come with a manual transmission, which is a 6-speed, or a dual-clutch auto. The hybrid is a 1.6, but with only 141 horsepower, so not quite as brisk. 11.2 seconds to 60, so it's actually a lot slower than the standard 1.6 turbo petrol model, but that one's supposed to return more like 60 mpg, and in my experience, the hybrids are quite pleasant in the Hyundai and Kia range. Then, of course, there's your electric vehicle models as well. Electric vehicle ones are going to be a range of between 230 and sort of 280 miles, depending on which model you go for. And if the Niro EV is anything to go by, they should be quite a pleasant experience to live with day to day. But of course, that is quite a big price jump to get to the EV. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about the car itself. This one I'm sitting in today is finished in Mirage Green, which I think is lovely. It's like a pistachio green that you see on some Porsches and stuff like that. It's really lovely, and I've had so many compliments on it. It's really nice modern colour. The only thing is you can change where the wheel arches and the sort of cladding around the car is black on this model. You can actually get that in body colour, which I do think looks better, looks a little bit more premium, but of course that's something that you can choose, you can decide on. It depends on what sort of look you're going for. So I definitely don't think the looks of this one is perfect, just because of the fact that this is the entry-level model with the smallest wheels, and unfortunately they are just, yeah, a little bit too small and a little bit too boring for this car. I think the much higher end models with the sort of 18 and 19-inch wheels do look a lot more posh. But overall, the design of the car is lovely. It's gone for a much more modern aesthetic than the previous generation Kona. I think probably to match in and tie with the Kia Niro. The Niro is definitely a little bit more angular than this one. As is with most Kias, the Hyundai tends to be the more sort of curvy shape, and there's no exception here. You get some angles down the side of the car, but overall you get a really nice smooth front and rear, and the lights are really the best function on this, I think. There's a pixel light bar that runs across the front with the daytime running lights, which looks really, really nice during the day and early evening, with your main LED headlights down further on the bumper of the car. It's very similar in layout to the Kia Niro, but I think the light bar on this that takes inspiration from the Hyundai Ioniq 5, I think really makes an impact. Same for the back, there's a light bar along the rear which is LED, and I think they just look fantastic. It's a real shame that there's no kind of integrated LEDs for the indicators or anything like that, but you know, we can't have everything at this price point. Overall, the styling is kind of subjective. I do think potentially people might want something more aggressive, would be happier with a Kia Niro, but overall, I think this refresh has done it a world of good and really brought it up to scratch with some more modern cars. Step inside, it's a very similar story. It's not quite as futuristic in here as in the Niro. In the Niro, you've got like a lot of capacitive touch buttons and kind of weird angles and stuff like that. In here, it seems to be all about modern simplicity. It's this kind of really kind of contemporary design. There's kind of a bit of an old school vibe to the center console with the radio. Some people have complained about how that looks a little bit old fashioned, but personally I like the functionality of it, and that's what I'm really going to say about this, is the functionality is there, the layout is fantastic for the driver. The actual design itself is quite good. You've got some kind of like hard plastic materials here and there, but they're textured in such a way where it wouldn't bother you too much, which is always good. Highlights for me includes the infotainment system. I think the Kia Hyundai infotainment systems are pretty much one of the best in the business. They're not quite as good as BMW iDrive because you don't have dual controls and you don't have quite as many functions, but there's lots of quality of life features baked in, such as quiet mode, where it turns off the rear speakers so the rear passengers can sleep. There's also like a valet parking mode where it restricts the car, and a few other bits. You've got drive profiles, so you can have, you know, you and your partner or whatever, you can have your own separate profile. So when you get in the car, you just press your name and it changes all the kind of settings of the car to how you like it. So there's lots of things like that baked in that just make the experience really easy to live with day to day. And that's something that's always been useful. You can even do voice memos on the infotainment. So if you're, you know, you need to jot something down, but obviously you can't use your phone while you're driving, just create a voice memo so you can sort it out when you get home. Silly little things like that I've always really loved. The star buttons are programmable to pretty much any function you want, so it's like a shortcut button, and that's really good that you've got that customization to things that you might want. The actual infotainment system is always really good on these, always super responsive, super snappy, no lag, and I think on the Hyundai particularly, it looks really pretty as well. The one thing that I complain about when I get into a Kia is I don't really like their kind of style and their font. That goes for all of the displays, but on this one, I'm happy to report that the kind of the modern typeface is really something that I find pleasing. The whole infotainment system just reminds me of their more expensive Genesis line cars, and that's no bad thing on a car at this price point. It takes a few minutes just to navigate and work your way around it, but once you do, you can go in and you can customize everything to your preference. You can get Apple CarPlay up nice and large, Android Auto as well, and you can also customize all of the driver features, such as this irritating boinging that you keep hearing, which is actually a speed limiter, which you can turn off, but I haven't found a way to turn off permanently. The actual digital driver's display in front of me is quite nice as well. There's a few different modes that you can choose from. There's like a modern version and there's also a classic version, which I think looks a little bit too old-fashioned in my opinion, but it also changes based on what drive mode you're in, whether you're in eco, normal or sport, which basically just changes the visuals on the display and increases the throttle response and sharpens the steering a little bit. Overall, the driver's display in front of you will basically just tell you the information that you need to see rather than any stuff that you might not want to. It does seem almost a bit of a waste of a screen not having stuff like maps on there like in the Volkswagen Audi group cars, but to be honest, it's not the end of the world. I do just like having the basic information on there. You've got your trip computer stuff on there. You can get like radio information on there. It will, you know, prompt you when to change gear and things like that. Overall, I just really like the design. In terms of the rest of the interior, what I do love is there's no gloss black. There's no fingerprint magnet stuff anywhere. Even the screen's not that fingerprinty, to be honest, which is lovely. It's angled towards me slightly as well, which was my complaint about the Niro, is that it was kind of flat and you feel like it's miles away. In this, it kind of is, it looks like one screen really. There's kind of one panel that's then sort of bent towards you as the driver, which is really nice. Over on the passenger side, you've got a little kind of shelf area and some nice materials on the dash. And the glove box is a little bit disappointingly small for the size of car, to be honest, but again, is a bit nitpicky because you do have other storage cubbies, like a nice big center console. There's an armrest that comes up with a little shelf in, and it kind of has a gap underneath it, so it just all opens up into this open plan layout. You've got 2 cup holders in there, which have a nice kind of grip mechanism in. So really, I can't complain too much about that. The door bins aren't the biggest of this class, this segment, but I can fit a decent sized bottle in there, which is all I care about personally. And there's a nice big tray up front, which in the more expensive models is a wireless charging for your phone, but in this one is simply just a kind of a little place for you to pop your phone when you're not using it or where it's plugged in. Center console is laid out really nicely. There's no gloss black, there's just this kind of nice brushed metal effect trim, which I quite like, and you've got some solid physical buttons there for everything, which I love. You've got climate controls with the toggle switches. Love that, it works super well. There's a simple button for sync, there's a simple button to turn it all off, there's a simple button for automatic. Really easy to use. It doesn't look the best in the business, no, but it's so functional, and I can forgive any kind of design quirks for the fact that it is just so easy to use and so nice to use when you're on the move. You don't have to kind of feel around and use all these weird haptic buttons and stuff like that. It's just simple, and I love that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Above that, you've got some physical controls for your infotainment system. Unfortunately, these buttons do feel a bit nasty. They're very mushy and don't have much tactile feel to them at all. They don't really feel like you've pressed them even. Kind of have to see if the screen responds. But it's a very small price to pay for having physical buttons. As I say, in the Nero, they're capacitive and they're quite difficult to use while driving. On the other hand, the steering wheel itself, the material of the leather is really nice. It's got this kind of 4-dot badge in the middle rather than the Hyundai badge, but I don't know why quite that is, but it looks good, and it's got the toggle switches for your volume and your infotainment stuff, and it's got these kind of knurled aluminium dials for volume and for cycling through some of the stuff in the screen in front of you here. Also, Kias and Hyundais have the one-touch button for lane keep assist. Even on this entry-level model, it has the proper auto steer in lane on the highway. All I do is press this one button, and straight away the car is steering for me. All I've got to do is keep some hands on the wheel, and it'll just steer as you go along, and that's amazing. You can just turn it off with that same button. Happy days. Really super easy to use. Even the sort of the indicators and the stalks are really nice. They've got a nice damped feel to them. The material feels nice, easy to use, and when you make adjustments, it comes up on screen so you're not guessing. I also prefer the design of this interior to the one in the N line, which has red trim and stuff like that. This one just seems more minimalistic. So overall, I just love the interior. I also love the fact that you've got USB-Cs front and rear across all models, and it kind of, there's a button as well that allows you to switch between connectivity and power mode, and there's also a 180 watt 12 volt outlet. I'm not a massive lover of the gear knob on this one. It's got like a, yeah, it's got kind of like a ridge to it, which I don't like the feel of. But overall, the actual gear changes themselves, they've got a bit of a notch to them. They do feel quite good, and I wouldn't say it's anything too much to complain about. Only thing is, I've got some blank switches down there where my heated seats and steering wheel and all that would normally be. Reversing camera, I'm not too keen on this. I much prefer the surround view cam on the higher end models. The rear view cam on this, it's got like a weird fisheye effect to it. And yeah, for some bizarre reason, it looks as though you're going to hit stuff that you're not. It just doesn't look quite right to me. Seats I really like for a base model car. Even these cloth ones, they've got a nice amount of support. They've got electric lumbar adjustment and some manual adjustment aside from that. And of course, you can opt for like the reclining ones on the more expensive models. So overall, I think they're quite impressive. Like, the headrest is just in the right place for me. It's got just the right amount of upper back support, and I could see myself doing a long journey in them just fine. No complaints, and a lot better than some of the other cars in its class. Rear seats are really good too, a bit firm, and there's a big kind of transmission hump in the middle in this particular one, but obviously that's slightly different in the EV model. And overall, the interior space has really grown from the previous generation. The previous Kona was kind of berated a little bit for the interior, the cabin space, just because it was a little bit more super mini than it was crossover. But this one, they've really taken that feedback on board and made it feel a lot more spacious in here. And now it does feel more like a sort of a small SUV, which is kind of the segment that it's geared towards. So yeah, props to Hyundai for really figuring that bit out. Back there, you've got some USB-C charging, which is nice. You've got 2 of those, which is good on a car of a base spec. And also, you've got some slight recline on those rear seats, which is always nice. You've also got some ISOFIX points back there as well for your child seats. And if you fold the seats flat, you've got a really generous cargo space. So the load lip is pretty much non-existent. The floor is kind of false and you can adjust it up and down, which is good again on an entry-level car. And there's a few tie-down hooks and things like that. No special features really in the back, but the parcel shelf is really easy to remove, although not really easy to store, unfortunately. But to be honest, it's not really too bad because you can just kind of do away with that whilst you're loading up the car with a lot of cargo. And overall, like, I've got to say, the actual loading process is super straightforward. The seats fold completely flat, the floor is completely flat, no load lip, and that's kind of what you want in this segment of car. It kind of ticks all the boxes. So no complaints at all there. It's also a little bit bigger than a Skoda Kamiq as well. In terms of visibility, pretty good. The only thing that's not so great is there's a massive kind of C-pillar in the way. Like, I can't see that corner of the car at all. But thankfully, looking out of the mirrors, the side mirrors are really large and a really nice design and shape, which I really like. This one doesn't have the blind spot monitoring because it's the entry-level car, but to be honest, the visibility is still good enough that I wouldn't worry too much about that. And I can get my seat high enough that I can see the corners of the car as well. It's also worth noting on the interior that on the right-hand side here, I've got the electric handbrake, which does take a little bit of getting used to, but also on the automatic models, the transmission stalk is up there as well, rather than down here in the middle. But again, that's something that you can quite easily adapt to. And overall, just sitting here and looking at the layout, it's just all perfect, absolutely perfect. I've even got elbow resting. I can position myself exactly how I want to be. The seating position isn't the best, I will be honest, for someone of my height. I'm 6 foot and I feel like I've not quite got enough thigh support, at least in this manual version. If I was in an auto, I think I could get it a bit better, but because I've got my foot on the clutch, I can't quite position it right. But again, very nitpicky. I even like the kind of cloth material over here on the curve of the display, which is another speaker. And I think it just looks great, especially because of this lovely modern font and typeface on the car. So we've covered looks then, and we've covered how great the interior is. So in terms of driving then, let's give it a bit of beans and see what it's got. Now this, as I say, is the entry-level 1 litre turbo manual. So it's not the pokest thing in the world, but it is still some good fun to be had. So let's take this roundabout and go for a fast exit. It does feel a little bit, it's a little bit boaty and understeery. And it doesn't really, the traction control kicks in at the right points, which is nice. I really do have to wring it out to get the best out of it. But performance isn't too bad. If you're pottering around town, this is the sort of car you go for, right? If you're going for like a normal little city car, this is effectively the same sort of drivetrain that you'd have on that. One thing you will notice is there's constant flashing on the dash telling me about lane keep assist. You can keep hearing that bonging. I've left that on just to show you what it's like. That's when I stray maybe like 1 mile an hour over the speed limit. It will bong and say, no, stop, you're going a little bit too quick. And you can turn that off in the settings, but in older cars, I've been able to turn that off permanently based on driver profile. In this one, I can't seem to get it to stay off. It seems to keep coming back of its own accord, which is quite irritating. But that being said, obviously there's loads of safety systems built in. It's got a like an infrared sensor on the dash, which will tell you if you're not paying enough attention. It will also, obviously, if you're tired as well. And that one-touch auto steer that I told you about, which I've always loved on these. It makes driving a really long journey far less fatiguing, in my opinion. Overall, the cabin is relatively quiet as well, which is impressive for a car in this segment. The only thing I would say is there is a little bit of wind noise coming from the front of the car. I think that's just because of its kind of boxy shape. I experienced a similar thing in the Kia Soul, so that's just something to bear in mind. But yeah, it's not something I would say is a major complaint. I usually listen to music when I'm driving along anyway, so it's really not that bad. The brakes themselves are quite responsive in this particular car. They can be a little bit spongy in the EV models, but they're not as bad as some EVs, to be honest. When I reviewed the Nero, something I mentioned quite a lot is that it kind of felt like a traditional car in many ways, which is what a lot of first-time EV buyers are probably looking for. So in this, the only time they feel a little bit crunchy is when the emergency front assist kicks in. It thinks you're going to hit something. And to be honest, on these cars, that does make me a little bit anxious because sometimes it's a little bit too keen. Clutch is quite light and not too bad to deal with. And you do feel the power once that turbo boost kicks in. On the motorway, this one is quite sluggish, I'll be honest, just because it's not got much power, especially on the high end. It relies on that low down turbo. Yeah, I'm not getting much understeer. It is really gripping, to be fair. You can see how far I'm leaning in the seat here, and it is clinging on. Yeah, there's a little bit of body roll. It's not too bad. I don't feel like I'd really like chucking it around a country lane too fast. But to be honest, for a front-wheel drive car, it handles okay. It's quite light, the steering, it's quite maneuverable, and the turning circle's quite decent. So for most people who are just pottering around in this, it's going to be completely sufficient. Overall, I think I would probably prefer the higher powered model, either the hybrid model, so you've got a little bit of that sort of hybrid shove, or potentially the 1.6 turbo. The EVs are obviously a massive step up in price, but if you're in the market for one, they do still come out a little bit cheaper than its sister car, the Kia Niro, so that's something to consider. And I think the looks are going to be subjective, which one you prefer. But I think both cars represent a really good value in this segment compared to a lot of its rivals, especially when it comes to the tech and the ease of use and the quality of life features. That's something that I've always praised them for, and the long warranty will put a lot of people's mind at ease as well, especially with all this tech on board. So overall, I mean, I wouldn't say it's the most fun car to drive of its class at all, but I think it's going to be the most livable for a lot of consumers who are just looking for a new family car that's kind of more modern than what they have currently and has a lot of this new stuff baked in. I think it's a really pleasant place to sit, and it's got a lot of practicality. Yeah, some sort of cargo features, maybe a bigger glove box would be nice, slightly larger door bins would be nice. But for most people who just want a large kind of spacious interior on a car that isn't too big, that's a real strong point here. You know, there's lots of legroom in the back, even with the seating position, in my seating position for driving or sitting in the passenger seat, I've still got plenty of room back there. I've not got much thigh support, but again, I've got big, long, lanky legs, so your mileage is going to vary. And if you've just got kids back there, they're going to have miles of room. It represents really good value, I think, the fact that it comes in a little bit cheaper than the Kia Niro as well. I would definitely go and consider that car as well, because they're both kind of, they've got lots of differences, but they're very similar driving experiences. So if you're in the market for a car in this segment, whether it be the petrol version, the hybrid, or the EV, definitely compare both. I've got my review of the Niro on the channel as well, so I would encourage you to go and look at that if you haven't already. And if you want to lease one of these, I've got the best deals linked below. Also, it's worth having a look on their configurator, just because there's so much choice. And that's great, because it's one of these cars where there really is one for everyone. In terms of the price range, the different choices of drivetrain, the different choices of spec, and just the way it looks as well, with the different color options and the wheel options. Do you know what? After driving both, I've also spent some time in the old Kona. I would say this is a massive improvement over the old Kona. If you've already got one of those and you're looking to upgrade, this is a big improvement in terms of interior, especially. Yeah, I would say overall, out of the two, I would probably go for this. I'd probably go for the Kona, just because comparing prices, they're so similar. Sometimes this one comes out cheaper even. And I just think to live with day to day, I think it's just a tiny, tiny little bit better. And also, as I say, I really, really dig the infotainment design. It just looks really modern and pretty, especially with this sort of Hyundai typeface. But that's it from me today. Thank you so much to Hyundai for sending out the vehicle, and thank you so much for you guys for watching. I appreciate all the support that you've given me in all of the videos that I do. It's, you know, the channel is growing, and I'm really appreciative of all of the comments, suggestions, and feedback that I get. So please feel free to get in touch in the comments or by DM on Instagram. Also, thank you for bearing with me today. It possibly felt a little bit more disjointed than my usual reviews, but I've not been very well, and as you can hear by my voice, it's not treated me too well. So thank you for bearing with me, and I will catch you guys in the next video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.